What's up? I'm Cassidy Nicholas, and today we are talking goblet squats. We're gonna talk about the dumbbell goblet squat versus the kettlebell goblet squat and why we would use one over the other. First, I'm gonna go over general squat mechanics because we must do that before we put any weight in hand. But then I'm gonna go over why you might choose a dumbbell over kettlebell or vice versa. And then I'm gonna go over the form for each one. Let's get into it. Before I let you know when or why you should use a dumbbell versus a kettlebell, let's go over general squat mechanics. We're gonna start from the ground up as far as our setup. Now, as far as where you set your feet, if you've ever had a coach or instructor tell you this is exactly where you should set your feet with your toes at exactly this angle, run away, because everyone's squat stance is going to be slightly comfortable. We want to find where we could set our feet so that we can get the deepest range of motion with the neutral spine. We'll get to the neutral spine thing later. So a good starting point is just to simply jump as high as you can and see where you land when you land softly like a cat. Now, a good starting point as well, if you're not sure, is heels just outside the hips and toes ever so slightly pointed out. We don't want our toes so wide that when we twist our knee out, we feel no torque, no resistance, and we don't want it so narrow that we feel very limited in our range of motion. So that's a good starting point, and then play with a couple inches in or out as far as where your heels are, or your toes a couple inches in or out as we get going in the range so that you could find your most comfortable stance. Now, that neutral spine I talked about. As a standard, we do want a neutral spine in a squat, meaning that our ribs are stacked on top of our hips throughout the range of motion. There's no twerking and no tucking. Now, this does not mean that in life or in exercise, your spine will never bend. It's just a good standard and a good starting point. So I'm gonna start with unlocking my knees because that's the only way to have my hips slightly tucked underneath me. And then I wanna keep my ribs in. If my ribs are puffed out, my back is gonna go into extension. I want to maintain this throughout the range of motion. In other words, as I go down, I don't want to start to twerk, like I mentioned, stick the butt out, puff the ribs out. And I, of course, don't want to tuck, but I want to be right in between. Always a good idea to inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up. We also want to stay super evenly grounded in our foot tripod, our heel, our big toe knuckle, pinky toe knuckle. So keep that big toe grounded, spread those feet nice and wide. I love to go barefoot, but that's just me. And pull through the bottoms of those feet and push out of the bottom. Now, goblet squats are an awesome way to load a squat, regardless of what tool you're going to use. Because when you load with weight in the front, you recruit a ton of core. By having that neutral spine, our core is gonna support our spine to be able to stay in that position, but then we hold that weight in front, we're not only loading the legs, but we're loading our core. So doing nice and heavy goblet squats is going to do way more for your core than crunches and sit-ups ever will. All right, let's get into kettlebell versus dumbbell. Now, I'm a kettlebell person, but I'll try not to be super biased here. However, if you do have both options and they're the same weight, I would choose a kettlebell and I'll let you know why. Then we'll go back to the dumbbell. The reason I love a kettlebell goblet squat is I believe it gives you the best overall engagement because of how it recruits the lats. So a proper kettlebell goblet hold, you grab the horns with the base of your palm right on the ball of the bell and you grip all 10 fingers, let them wrap around the horns. Then you want to pull the bell off your chest and tuck your elbows in so that your forearms make the number 11. Be mindful that this isn't causing you to round forward. We can lock in while still having the shoulders rolled back. Now, as we drop into that goblet squat, we want to make sure that the elbows don't drop back to our ribs and the bell doesn't pull our chest down. Rather, we want to keep our elbows up on an invisible shelf. You'll know what I mean by this lat engagement if you just try a kettlebell goblet squat with your elbows out versus locking them in. So more lat recruitment, more overall core engagement, in my opinion. Dumbbells are also great to load goblet squats. However, when working with lighter loads, I find that there's not as much lat engagement because we don't have that ability to grip with our whole hand and lock that elbow down. So I'm not really getting much here in my lat. However, we're still going to load the core and the legs fairly similarly. Here's where I would choose a dumbbell over a kettlebell. When kettlebells get super heavy, it becomes extremely taxing on the grip and on the shoulders. And I don't have a kettlebell large enough with me to show you this, to the point where if I were using a kettlebell, I would probably want to flip it upside down and hold it like such if I were going to do a super heavy goblet squat. You'll notice that this feels a lot like that dumbbell goblet squat, not as much lat engagement. I find that when it comes to super heavy weights, dumbbells are actually easier to hold. Side note, if you actually do want the same engagement that you get with that kettlebell with that dumbbell, I would actually flip that dumbbell up on its side. Look at how much this simulates that kettlebell goblet hold. We get to have vertical forearms forming the number 11, elbows in, and I get that lat engagement, and I get to keep my elbows up on that shelf. So you have options. I love both of these tools for this exercise. Let me know, what's your favorite? What did I miss? If this helped you out, go ahead and subscribe and let me know what other movements you'd like me to go over. Live epic, be epic.